Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. I am so glad you're joining me today. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Roseann Capanna-Hodge, a leading expert in integrative and pediatric mental health and the host of It's Gonna Be Okay, a vital resource for parents navigating children's behavior and mental health. Dr. Roseann has helped countless families adopt evidence-based, compassionate approaches to children's well-being, and I'm so excited that she's here today. Now, we all face moments of high stress as parents. We can probably all think of instances where we have felt overwhelmed by our child's behavior. Well, today, Dr. Roseann is going to talk about how we can respond to behaviors by reducing demands and shifting perspective. We're talking about low-demand parenting.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Roseann, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I am so excited for this conversation. If it's as good as our pre-conversation, this is going to be a can't-miss episode.
I know. I think we spoke for 30 minutes before we even started recording.
Well, we're both assessors. And,
I know. There's so much to talk about.
So much to talk about. I love me a good assessment, and a great assessment can be transformative for kids.
It really can. Mm-hmm. It really can. And we've talked about assessments on the podcast before. And one of the things you said before we started recording was that assessments is only as good as the recommendations you make and the connections you make following the assessment. So I'm glad that that actually ties beautifully into the topic of, low demand parenting, because parents want answers in terms of how to support their kids. And it's a parenting philosophy that's gained some traction, particularly among families of neurodivergent children. And when I saw, your posts and listened to your podcast, I knew that you were the one to talk about this topic with our listeners. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about this because neurodivergence and wired differently brains are on the rise. And, when we go to have kids, right, including myself as a mom of 2 neurodivergent kids, nobody tells you you're going to have a wired differently kid, right? Even if you come from a family where everybody's wired differently or uniquely, however you want to say it. And when we have kids with clinical issues or their nervous system is dysregulated for whatever reason, we don't know what to do. We don't even know how to parent neurotypical kids most of the time. And so low demand parenting is a style of parenting that has come with the rise of kids that are uniquely wired. And it's a great, I think it's a misunderstood parenting technique. People think it means that you don't parent. And that's just not true. I mean, there are core philosophies. It's really about meeting kids where they're at. And, really trying, it's a child-led approach, which is why it works so well with kids that, may struggle with sensory sensitivity or auditory processing. I mean, I think it's a great approach for kids of all types. And, it's really about parents regulating first, which isn't easy.
Not at all.
We'll talk about that. And it's about problem solving collaboratively, which is new for parents because we're inheriting our parenting from our parents.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that many listeners might be unfamiliar with the term low demand parenting. And like you said, there might be some misconceptions about it. I know that some people think about it as permissive parenting, which it's not. But how does it differ than, for example, more traditional boundary-driven parenting approaches?
Yeah. I mean, we are still stuck on that we have to discipline out the behavior or the neurodivergent issue or whatnot. There's still a lot of talk about kids, and between couples in particular, or between you as a couple and your in-laws, or, that kids do things on purpose, right? That's not to say kids don't always do things on purpose, but when kids have dysregulated nervous systems, no matter where it's coming from, they're going to fall back on behaviors that they've learned, right? They may not be healthy behaviors. They may not be behaviors that serve them, but their brain goes back to what they know, right? So when we think about low demand parenting, it is not permissive parenting. It is a collaborative approach, right? Where you are, number one, you are regulating yourself first, right? So when you're regulating yourself first, I talk about this all the time, you're not coming in hot, right? So, perfect example, my teenager was mad at me about something yesterday and he came in hot. And I was like, I'm not going to come in hot. I'm going to meet him with my calm to diffuse the situation, right? And it was like a ridiculous situation. He was demanding I order takeout. I was like, hold on, and I'm Italian mother. You just have to be like, Mom, I feel like we can have this thing. What do you think? You know what I mean? And instead he was irritated with me. And so I said, you have to regulate yourself first. And so when we talk about low demand parenting, right, what we're saying is that we need to teach them flexibility, coping skills, and problem solving, right? And that is a lot harder when you're coming in hot, right? So it's really about those foundational components and meeting your kid where they're at, right? So you've got a kid with sensory issues, right? There's traditional parenting of get over it, put those socks on. It's not going to work, right? But in low demand parenting, you're like, I feel you. I hear you. This is uncomfortable. But you would switch to problem solving, right? And you would be like, what are our options right now, right? You put these socks on yesterday and they were uncomfortable. Can we think about what you could do today that helped you yesterday? You're getting them to switch their mindset. And, I love this style of parenting. When you're really teaching your child to be more autonomous, people don't think of this as autonomy, but you're actually really helping them learn how to tolerate stress, recognize stress, and manage those uncomfortable sensations through coping, right? So we're playing a long game in self-regulation over time, right? So and you can start this at any time, right? I always talk about kids, some of my kids are in their 30s, they're failure to launch kids. You can start this at any time. Anytime you're shifting your parenting, you're going to get pushback. It's behaviorism. But it requires patience. That's why co-regulation is on the top list. And co-regulation is more than you got it together. You don't have to be perfect, but your go-to is to try to meet your kid with patience, right? I talk about parenting as 80% successful. So if you're 80% of the time doing that, your kid is not only feeling your calm, you're demonstrating calm. You're showing them the behavior you want to see. And that is dramatic for kids.
Yes. Absolutely. And when you talk about kind of that co-regulation component, the flexibility, the problem solving, the collaboration, none of that sounds like giving in or being permissive. It seems very intentional in terms of what you are doing. And it seems that the goal is, again, you talk about not coming in hot, is to reduce anxiety and avoid that triggering that fight or flight response that we often see in our kids.
And that's one of the number one benefits of low demand parenting is actually to reduce anxiety, reduce stress. And with that comes less meltdowns, more emotional regulation. I think that what most people don't realize when we think about, I love to talk about the nervous system in the brain, and, what guides our stress response is our autonomic nervous system. So our ANS, it's there, it's helping us get through stress. But when we have kids that are unique, right? And you could be a totally neurotypical kid and experience this as well. We're seeing this a lot. Once you have different kinds of stressors, right? Maybe it's a loud classroom. Maybe you have a yeller teacher. Maybe you're eating foods that you're creating an inflammatory response in your body, or you have allergies, or you have parents that are angry a lot. These are all things that activate our nervous systems over time. So once we move from a relaxed parasympathetic state to a more stressed sympathetic dominant state, at the tippy top of sympathetic dominance is you go into full overload. It's fight, flight, or freeze. Now we're talking about fawn. We don't really think of our kids like when you're providing a good education, great food, a lovely home. We don't really think about our kids having those kinds of activations in their nervous systems. But I think you would agree that this is what we're seeing kids. I've never seen kids more distressed along with distressed parents. And once your nervous system gets in a pattern of a stress response, it's going to act more stress. The more stress you experience, the more your nervous system activates, the more it's going to activate. So when we give kids through low demand parenting ways to problem solve, right? You're not just saying figure it out. You're saying, let me help you figure it out. Let me guide you. Let's do this together. Kids not only reduce stress, reduce those activations, which cause the nervous system to activate, they're actually feeling better about themselves. They're gaining confidence. They're feeling successful. And that's so powerful for the subconscious brain, right? We're not going in and rescuing them. We're like, hey, let's work this out together. Let's have collaborative problem solving where you can figure this out. It's a very powerful way to parent. And I think it fits so nicely with modern times in general, but also particularly for our neurodivergent population.
Right. And I think that's important that you mentioned that, because I think so many of the students that we work with who have learning differences, thinking differences, who are neurodivergent, they have a hard time meeting the demands of, the environments that they're in. And that creates this constant feeling of being overwhelmed.
Yes.
And so by doing this approach where you're actually helping them to develop problem solving skills, you're giving them strategies that they can use for life.
Absolutely. And we know that, having coping skills and stress tolerance is actually one of the greatest definers of lifelong happiness.
Mm.
And, we're so in the moment with our kids, like, oh, this is a rough school year. Oh, this is their best friend moved, all these normal things. We don't always think about, parenting is about creating an independent, happy human being. It's not just about getting them into college. It's not just about getting them the job that's going to pay for things. It's about wanting them to really love themselves and feel happy. And self-regulation is that path. It's key. And our neurodivergent kids have more things that activate their nervous system. They're more sensitive to their environment. And that's overwhelming for the kid. It's overwhelming for the parent. It also leads to a lot of power struggles at home, especially because, again, we're not taught this stuff. Like, we're handed a baby. We know about the car seat.
Right. Yes.
And I think that's it.
That's about it. Yes. And then you leave the hospital and you wave to the doctors and nurses.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
You figure it out on your own.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, all those little milestones, all the little things that happen, and, you get this idea. Like, I thought my kids, I had the Montessori school picked out. One kid did make it there. He's doing great. But, you have this vision, right? It's just going to be easy. And then, you fall back. The number one way we learn to parent, as I said, is from our parents. And I talk about my mom and dad, Tony and Philomena, all the time. And they taught me some really great things, but they also taught me some bad things too, like favor your male child. It's very cultural thing, and, that's not a good thing, so and that's just one part, right? Maybe you grew up in a house full of yellers. I mean, that's some stuff. That's almost, for some people, it's trauma, right? And so when we have a kid who's dysregulated, it can really activate us as parents.
Right. And a lot of parents are unlearning the behaviors that they witnessed as children themselves, right?
100%.
Yeah. And so having a new approach and realizing that how it can be helpful can be, again, dramatic in terms of how it impacts the family, functioning in the family unit. And you talk about, reducing stress and reducing anxiety as a key feature of low demand parenting. Are there things that parents can do to create a low arousal environment in their homes that can enhance their kids' mental health?
I mean, there's so many things. I think that the number one thing that you can start with, which I know we were talking, the U.S. Surgeon General just came out with a report saying, 40% of parents in the U.S. are so overwhelmed, they feel absolutely shut down and incapable of parenting, which is super alarming. And I think it's true. So the number one thing, right? And when you're overwhelmed, everything feels like a mountain, right? So I want you to be inspired by this, but I also all the time say, I want you to take action. And so the one action you can start with actually is co-regulation. Now, it's not as hard as people think, right? So we all think like, I'm going for my massage tomorrow night, Karen. So, those are great things, right? We all think it has to be the big thing. I'm going to go on a girls' trip or whatever. It's actually the micro things. So there's two things I want to talk about is you as a parent, and then what are the micro steps you can add in to make this shift, right? So that it feels like, wow, Roseann, I can do this, Dr. Bro. So number one, what can I do to regulate? So you need 10 minutes a day, okay? So I don't care if you have to hide in the garage, don't hide in the bathroom, even the cat and dog will find you there, but find, right? Maybe,
they will.
They will. Maybe you're dropping your kids off, maybe you leave for work 10 minutes early and you're actually gonna sit in your car and you're gonna do breath work. Maybe you're doing meditation at night. You need to have active practices to regulate your nervous system. Can you do yoga moves like legs up the wall, which get your brain, right? Are there other somatic activities, right? Maybe you need to have all the parents in our one-to-one program, they actually get a personal mantra. And then I'm like, let's hear the mantra. So we have to shift our perspective, right? So they call it mindset shifting. And that is something we all can do. And it starts with micro behaviors that you are consistently doing, right? So visualizing, all the successful business people, all the huge athletes, they spend time every day visualizing success, right? So we have to shift that perspective from the problem to the solution. And that's going to start with you regulating yourself. And I know when I've done like calm parenting challenges and, I love a 4, 7, 8 breath. So you're breathing in for 4, you're holding for 7 seconds, and you're exhaling for 8. When you do a longer exhalation, it pushes you into a parasympathetic state. When you're actively doing this little thing, it's immediate, right? So starting with that is honestly the hugest thing you can do. All right. And nobody wants to believe that. But when people do it, they're like huge, right? And then the other part of this is, what do I say? What do I do with my kid? Because what I'm doing isn't working. And I think that's probably the most common thing. That's why people come to me is they're like, I'm doing all these things. I'm going to the therapist. I'm doing this and nothing is working. And that's because parents don't know the power of their own parenting. And it's the micro shifts. It's not a pill. I do things like neurofeedback and PEMF. I love that stuff, right? Those are big things. They work, but it's not that in and of itself, those things. You still have to shift your parenting. And so when we talk about low demand parenting, how can we foster those coping skills, right? It's actually micro shifts in what you're saying, right? So just like the sock story, right? You're not going to say, put those darn socks on, right? You're not going to ignore it. You're not going to have too much empathy for your child around it, right? I mean, you are, but what do you do, right? So in that example, right, shifting it to getting your child to recognize they found a solution, number one, right? So, yesterday it was hard for you and you got them on, right? What could you do today that you did yesterday? And your kid may be dysregulated. They may ignore you. And that's where you're like, well, yesterday you did 10 jumping jacks and then you put your socks on. I think that made your body feel better, whatever word you want to say, right? And then get their light bulb to go off. Now, this requires an investment and requires consistency. You're not going to do this one time. I think that's the other part about having a neurodivergent is that you need to reinforce, and reinforce some more. So it takes 3 times for a neurodivergent brain or a distressed brain to learn. 3 times. And they say it takes 34 times of doing something to learn it at an innate level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 100 times.
Right. It takes time.
Yeah. Those are the kind of shifts. It's as I always like to say, repeat my daddy, Tony always says it's easy with the mouth. So these things are hard, but it's very doable. I'm not talking about nothing. These things don't cost money. It costs you having the patience and putting the elbow grease in. You're already working really hard and it's not working. It's about shifting it to what we know through science actually works.
Right. And those are micro shifts. Those are micro things that we can do that can have a huge impact, which is why it's so significant. And, when you talk about shifting, shifting our parenting, shifting our way of doing things, I also think about, shifting our language. When we talk about some of the behaviors that we see as parents, they often can feel very manipulative, right? They can feel like the child is being controlling. And I feel like we have to shift the way we talk about our child's behavior as well and kind of dig a little deeper and trying to understand kind of what's beneath the surface.
I love that you said that because, the parents I work with are just amazing, right? And we're all doing the best we can, even when we feel like we're not, right? And we have this idea that our kids are trying to scam us and manipulate us. And when your nervous system is dysregulated, you have one thing going on, and that is you want to remove that uncomfortableness. And so the brain will do anything it can to reduce it. Again, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, but we can guide our kids towards healthy ways of managing all these uncomfortable sensations, right? And, I think one of the greatest trends in a negative way besides, stress in general is that I'm seeing an awful lot of college kids get to college. The emphasis is only on the grades and they are really struggling. I mean, the number one reason people leave college is actually mental health. So we have this idea that, if kids just do better in school, right? And that's a double-edged sword because we're talking about neurodivergent kids. So, not doing well in school can lead to serious emotional issues. So certainly things you and I have seen. But there are many kids that are quote unquote neurotypical. I don't see a lot of those, but that are getting to school and they don't have skills to manage uncomfortable sensations, thoughts, and feelings. And so everything is stressful for them and they don't have a way to manage. So so many college kids are on psychiatric medication. 1 in 4 adults is on a psychiatric medication, up from 1 in 6 just in the pandemic, right before the pandemic. So, pills are not skills. And we have to let go of that idea that we can't be the power to teach our kids of all ages these things. And again, kids aren't acting like this on purpose. They're acting like this on autopilot because they don't know another way.
Right. And I think, when you talk about pills not being skills, that's exactly what we were talking about before we, hit record, is that oftentimes parents can believe that this medication is going to be the solution to the problem, right? And it can aid in, addressing some of the neurobiology that's impacting behaviors, but it is never, ever the sole solution to addressing difficult behaviors or challenging behaviors.
No, absolutely. I mean, we see that all the time. And I think parents know that because, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups, and obviously I've been doing this for 3 decades. I've worked with thousands of people. And that's what brings people to my door is they're like, well, I was told to do this thing and it didn't help. In many cases, it makes it worse. And it's such a feeling of overwhelm because that's all that's offered and nobody's really talking about parenting and just how much it can be powerful. And I think the complexity in this kind of parenting and breaking generational patterns, right, is that one, your partner may not be in agreement with you. And I see more and more partners not being in agreement. And that's why it's important to listen to this episode, get inspired, and then have your partner listen. Have grandma listen. I have a lot of grandmas that are caretakers, and boy, some of them are just inspiring. I have a lot of grandmas that actually find me and tell their kids to go to me.
Oh.
And so, when we know better, know more, we can do better, And so I have a lot of warrior moms who are the PhDs in their kids' issue. And that's great. But you have to also give this information to your spouse. Literally turn this podcast on and be like, we're going to sit and listen to this in the car, and give them a chance. A lot of the dads who come to me don't, they're working, right? And in traditional, kind of relationships, and they're just not getting the actual information from the experts. And I find that to be really helpful when they sit down and listen. So, this isn't just about you being the warrior. You need a warrior buddy. And it hopefully is the people in your, it's your mother-in-law, it's your mom, it's your best friend, it's your partner in life. And sometimes that can't happen, but that's another level of stress for parents because when you have a kid that's wired differently, you're going to get a lot of opinions about their behavior more than anything else. And it's not fair, but it's a reality. And so the more you're secure and the more you do these things, the more reinforcement your child gets. That's how behavior really makes a change, not just now, but for their life.
And it changes the parent-child relationship as well. Because when you are better regulated, your child is better regulated, and it directly impacts how you interact with each other and the warmth that you share and experience together.
Absolutely. You're so much more connected. You create a safety for your child, right? I'm a mom of a dyslexic, right? He's a very self-regulated kid. I have to be honest. He came out like that. And, you get to, there's things that they go through that are very stressful, right? And so when they know this is safe, this is a place where I can work on problems, they're going to come to you throughout their life with big things that are, oh my gosh, this horrible thing happened. And it starts with that trust relationship. But, kids that are wired differently do experience, we know they get 20,000 more negative messages in their life. 20,000. And so you being regulated, them having coping skills, empower them to counter those negative messages that they get. And it is that powerful when we change the way we parent our kids to really focus on those skills that let them talk back to anxiety or distress or worry or grief. These are skills that our kids need to be taught.
Absolutely. And as you're teaching them these skills and collaborating with them using this approach, like you're saying, you're building trust. And when you do that, it provides an environment that fosters open communication. So like you're saying, when they come to you because they know that you've strategized on problem solving other issues before, now they trust that you can help them problem solve another area of difficulty that they might have.
Absolutely. And, we want to foster that open communication because kids are exposed to a lot today through technology and different things. And, every child will face hurdles, whether we want to accept it or not. And we did too, And so having that, reducing the friction in the relationship, making kids feel more secure, and they're just more regulated. And, when you're more regulated, it doesn't mean you don't experience stress. You just don't activate and move into this fight, flight, or freeze all the time. And that's what's happening to our kids. They're just activated. And so you're seeing so much more behavioral meltdowns, distress. And we're talking kids of all ages. And what we want to do is for their nervous system to be more regulated so they can actually manage what goes on. And, kids today get diagnosed with a lot of things. And ultimately, I believe in my work that a lot of this is just about nervous system dysregulation. And you can look like you're ADHD or you're when you're really dyslexic. You can have OCD because your anxiety went to this different level. And so using these tools doesn't mean it eliminates things, but certainly can move things in a way where the symptoms are less. And we don't have so many of the other issues that affect the family ecosystem. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what you do for your child. If they don't have good self-esteem, nothing moves in the way in their life that they should. And coping skills and understanding themselves and knowing themselves, it's a long game in parenting. It just doesn't happen overnight. And some kids come out and it's like they're 57 years old,
But most don't.
I think every generation recognizes that our kids are facing increasing stressors. I think for me, my third decade of doing this, and we talked about this before, and I mentioned this, I think the thing that's most concerning for me is I've never seen more distressed parents. For very valid reasons. But, so there's a complexity here. And, I hope people hear this and they're thinking, wow, low demand parenting isn't what I thought it was, right? It's not just letting your kids, they have like free roam parenting, right? Like all these different styles, It's certainly opposite of authoritarian parenting, which is extreme discipline, right? The research says that doesn't work. Too permissive, too extreme causes the same behaviors in kids. And this is just, it's really about child-led, really teaching your child to manage, problem solve, and be more flexible and adaptable in the world. And as much as we'd like to have a magic wand, I always talk about a magic wand and, our kids are just going to be like this. It happens through good parenting.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Roseann, this has been such an informative conversation. And I'm sure that listeners are wondering, where can I learn more about low demand parenting? How can I connect with Dr. Roseann? Of course, we're going to put links to your social media and podcast in the show notes. What is the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, well, I have an awesome free download for people if they want to learn more about coping skills. I promise it's easy, quick videos, but also really what are the essential coping skills that I teach all my parents. And you can go to drroseann.com. So it's DRROSEANN, no E at the end, .com/coping skills. But you can find me, Dr. Roseann, everywhere. YouTube, Pinterest, Instagram, and my own show is It's Gonna Be Okay. But search Dr. Roseann, it comes up easier. But I'm all about science-backed solutions that actually are practical and that parents can start using today. And that's what I focus on, whatever we're doing, because I'm a busy mom too. And my kids are wired differently, and that's okay. And you need strategies that you can do. And I promise you, parents that do these things consistently, they're transformative.
Amen to that. Amen to that. So I'm going to make sure I put links to the download in the show notes, and also links to all of your social media. And I believe you have a Facebook group too, correct?
I do.
Okay.
It's Natural Parenting Solutions for Dysregulated Kids.
Perfect. I'll put a link to that as well, so that parents have all the places where they can connect with you, learn more, and learn from you. I cannot thank you enough for being here. I really appreciate it.
What a great conversation. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. I hope you learned a great deal, and be sure to check out the show notes. Dr. Roseann provided a number of resources for you, so be sure to check them out, and I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.